Good morning, everyone. Dear forensic friends, when we started with the preparations for the EAFS 2012, we almost immediately decided we should make space in the program for the international courts. Not because the most of them are housed in the International City of Peace and Justice of The Hague, but because, just like the national courts, they often rely heavily on forensic evidence. And given the fact that the role of forensics in general is increasing due to not only technological innovations, but also because the reliability of technical evidence, such as testimonies and confessions, is decreasing, it seemed quite logical to put the relationship between the forensics and the international courts high on the agenda of this conference. And since the Netherlands Forensic Institute has a large experience in working together with the United Nations in investigations, such as in Lebanon, I think all of you will remember the assassination of the former Prime Minister Hariri in 2005, followed by several other assaults. We decided to invite Mr. Serge Brammertz to address this conference. Mr. Brammertz was a public prosecutor for the UN in Lebanon and switched a few years ago to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, where he is now handling the Mladic case. Mr. Brammertz agreed to address this conference, but soon it appeared that he had to be abroad this day and he was not able to attend the conference personally. However, he succeeded in finding a very, very respectable substitute in the person of Mr. Bob Reid. Bob is Chief of Operations at the ICTY. He has been working at ICTY since 1994 and has held various positions since then. Bob was also the lead investigator in the first ICTY trial of Duško Tadić. And prior to working at ICTY, Bob was a police officer in the New South Wales Police Service in Australia. Having said this, I think it's quite obvious why the organization of the EAFS is both pleased and proud to have Bob here today as one of our distinguished plenary speakers. And Bob will focus in his presentation on the role of forensics in the investigation process and how the results can be used in a court of law in the international environment. In his presentation, Bob will address topics such as planning, standardizing by protocols, and the chain of custody. I look forward to his presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Bob Reid.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Kees, for that introduction. As Kees told you, my name is Bob Reid. I am the Chief of Operations at the Office of the Prosecutor, and I have been at the Tribunal since June of 1994. I came over from Sydney, Australia on leave without pay from my police force. I said to the then Deputy Prosecutor, I'm coming for 1 year, and 1 year only. It's been a very, very long year. 18 and a half years later, I'm still here. The then Deputy Prosecutor has now gone back. He's been back for about 8 years now. Firstly, let me send greetings from the Chief Prosecutor, Mr. Serge Brammertz. He was very disappointed that he couldn't be here to address this conference today. He is abroad and he's addressing prosecutors at the moment in South America, and he then travels to North America for a number of other meetings and meetings in the United Nations. But he asked me to pass on his very best to you, and he wishes you all a very, very successful conference. Secondly, let me thank the Netherlands Forensic Institute. I want to pay tribute to them, and I want to give a very big vote of thanks to them on behalf of my tribunal, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. We have used the resources of the Forensic Institute probably since about 1995, I think we started to become involved. And on that particular occasion, it was to carry out some DNA sampling for us and to give some results, DNA analysis in relation to one of our witnesses. So we've had a very close working relationship, and it's gone beyond DNA analysis now. It's document authentication, and even the storage of our documentation. And I'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, let's move on now. And let me just give you a bit of a historical background in relation to the work that we do at the Tribunal. In the early 1990s, 1991 in fact, a conflict erupted in the former Yugoslavia, the like of which had not been seen in Europe since the Second World War. Firstly, the Republic of Slovenia, then Croatia, and then Bosnia and Herzegovina were engulfed in bitter conflicts which would see many thousands dead and many, many thousands homeless. In the late 1990s, 1999 in fact, or 1998 and 1999, and in the early 2000s, the conflict spread to Kosovo and then into Macedonia. And conflicts of a similar nature have occurred in Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and other African states over the past 20 years, which tribunals, either ad hoc tribunals, special tribunals, or now the International Criminal Court, are carrying out investigations in relation to. My experience and the talk today will centre primarily on the Yugoslav conflict. I concentrate on that conflict and speak about the use of forensic evidence which has been gathered or examined to establish that crimes occurred or that the documentation was authentic. But firstly, let me give you just a little bit more of a background as to the setup of our tribunal. As I said, the conflict in the former Yugoslavia commenced in Slovenia in 1991, moved on to Croatia, and then into Bosnia-Herzegovina. And in around about April, May of 1992, the conflict in Bosnia-Herzegovina erupted. In 1993, as a result of the United Nations Commission of Experts report, which was conducted by Professor Sharif Bathioni, the United Nations Security Council set up the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, with its base in The Hague, the Netherlands. And I think we were probably the first international organisation, apart from the International Court of Justice. I think we were the first tribunal that commenced here in The Hague. Now the Sierra Leone Tribunal is here, OPCW is here, and the International Criminal Court is here. So it really has become the city for international justice here in The Hague. So our tribunal was set up in 1993, but it really wasn't until 1994 that we commenced with our full-fledged investigations in relation to the conflict. And I arrived in June of 1994, and I was the first investigator to arrive. When we arrived, we had a war that was still ongoing in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and we sat back and we thought, how are we going to investigate this? And what we did, we took the report that was conducted by Professor Bathioni, and we worked where we had the evidence. And we went with a municipality, the very first municipality that we started was in the northwest of Bosnia, a municipality called Prijedor. And that was the first trial in relation to Duško Tadić. And from that very, very first investigation, even then, we were carrying out major forensic investigations, not mass exhumations of mass graves, but we were doing crime scene examinations. We went to 3 camps in the municipality of Prijedor. We took scenes of crime officers with us, police officers. They photographed, they videoed the damage that was done in and around the villages. And in the camps, they videoed, we tested for blood, luminal testing, etc., etc. So forensic analysis and forensic work has been ongoing at the tribunal basically since we set up. Now, in the gathering of our evidence, there's 6 essential elements that you must have to put before a trial chamber to have a successful prosecution. Not all 6 will be present at the one time, but 5 of the 6 pretty much are. Now, the 6 categories that I've listed here as evidence is expert evidence, and by that I mean people who come in with a special expertise. Military officers, for example, to discuss the proportionality of an attack against a civilian population. Diplomats, journalists, and scientific evidence. And I think the best example of the scientific evidence I can give is the expertise that has been gathered in the Srebrenica investigation. We've conducted a number of trials in relation to what occurred in Srebrenica in 1995, in July of 1995. And we've had archaeologists, we've had pathologists, we've had dental experts, we've had scenes of crime officers, anthropologists, etc., 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 come to our court and give the evidence of what they found when they exhumed the mass graves in and around Srebrenica. So that's expert evidence. And that is pretty much evident in every single trial that we've had at the tribunal. Of course, the second category really doesn't need too much explanation. It's eyewitness testimony. Without eyewitnesses, the victims of the conflict, then you could not have a trial. We have the people come in, the victims of the crimes to come in and say, I saw this person do this, or I was there when this person was murdered, etc., etc. Today, we're not calling as many eyewitnesses. As you go up the chain of command and you get to Dr. Karadzic, Ratko Mladic, Slobodan Milosevic, Ante Gotovina, etc., the senior military leaders, the senior politicians, the senior police officers, there's not so much reason to call the eyewitness testimony or the eyewitness to give the evidence. What we do, though, we have to still prove that the crimes occurred. So we have machinery sections now where the evidence comes in, but the eyewitness doesn't have to come and give the evidence. It assists the eyewitness in that many of our witnesses are still severely traumatised. Some of them have given evidence at the tribunal 10, 11, 12 times. And now with the machinery sections that we have within our rules of procedure and evidence, that testimony can go in and is accepted by the court without the eyewitness having to come. In the early days, the witness had to come, because if it was the likes of Duško Tadić, the first trial that I worked on, he was the trigger puller. He was the person who was actually in the camp committing the crimes, and the eyewitness had to come along and say, I saw Duško Tadić in the camp. I saw him do this, because he was the main one that the trial revolved around. The third category is the forensic investigation. And as I said, in every single trial that we've had, bar none, we've always had forensic investigations, forensic evidence that's come in. The on-site investigations, for example, in the Omarska prison camp, the Keraterm prison camp, the Ternopolje camp in the municipality of Prijedor, to Srebrenica, to the crimes that occurred in Croatia, to the crimes that occurred in Kosovo and in Macedonia. We have always had forensic investigations, and it goes on to scenes of on-site investigations, exhumations, photographic and or video evidence, and DNA analysis. So that's the forensic evidence. And again, because the forensic work has been done to such a standard, such a high standard, again, in many of the cases, we're not calling the experts anymore. The evidence goes in because it's irrefutable. You just cannot rebut what the experts have found, the pathologists, the archaeologists, the anthropologists, the scenes of crime officers, etc., etc. The fourth area that we always produce in a court is the documentary evidence. And again, there's a forensic element to this. With the documentary evidence, we have carried out numerous seizures throughout the former Yugoslavia. With Croatia, but mainly in Bosnia, we have the power to obtain a search warrant, and we're able to go into archives, military archives, police archives, municipal buildings, presidential buildings, etc., and we've been able to obtain the documentation from those particular areas. And again, we've received great assistance from the Netherlands Forensic Institute in relation to a lot of that documentation, and I'll touch on that very shortly. The fifth area that we look at is the insider evidence. Now, insiders really are the co-perpetrators to the crimes, or they can be the driver, or they could be the secretary. And they come along and they give evidence, normally in open court. Some of it is closed with some of the insiders. But yesterday we had the final oral arguments in the case of General Ptolemy, who's been charged with the crimes that occurred in and around Srebrenica and Žepa in July of 1995. That trial is just about complete. And in that, there was great reference made to one of the insiders, a colonel, I think he was, or a Major Nikolic. And he came and he gave evidence. He was indicted. He pleaded guilty to the crimes in and around Srebrenica. And he came and he gave evidence against his hierarchy, if you like, and said this is exactly what happened. So he came along, he gave the evidence, and hopefully that will enable a conviction to be entered against General Ptolemy. But as a prosecutor, I'm always saying that hopefully there'll be a conviction. The last area is one that we don't use very much anymore, and that's the interview or the interrogation of the suspect. The lower level perpetrators would always be interviewed, and we would always interview those. The likes of Karadzic, Mladic, Milosevic, Gotovina, etc., they refuse to be interviewed, so we're not using that type of material very much anymore. But as I said, the 5 previous categories will always be found in any of the presentations before the trial chambers at the tribunal. The 5 are not used individually or separately from each other. They're all linked and corroborate each other. And the best example I can give of that is, again, turning to Srebrenica. If the eyewitness gives a statement and the eyewitness says, look, when the Serb forces came into Srebrenica, they came in, women and children were taken to one side, all the men we were put on buses. We were taken to an execution site, our hands were tied behind our backs, we were blindfolded, and then people were shot. I survived, luckily, and there are a number of witnesses who have survived the killings in and around Srebrenica, and they've given evidence. Now, that alone is fairly compelling evidence, but what we try to do is then corroborate that before a trial chamber. And the best corroboration then is your forensic evidence. If you then exhume the grave and every single individual hasn't got their hands tied behind their backs, they're not blindfolded and they're all stabbed to death, it's not very good corroboration for that particular eyewitness. But that's not the case in Srebrenica. The case has been that every single witness that has come along has described what occurred to them. We then do the exhumations at the mass graves, and predominantly everything the eyewitness has said has been corroborated by the forensic evidence. So both the scientific evidence is corroborated by the eyewitness is corroborated by the scientific evidence. Then you add the documentary evidence to that, where there are orders, there are petrol receipts, there are, to do an execution on the scale of Srebrenica, they had to have buses, they had to have trucks, they had to have backhoes, they had to dig the pits, they had to have the soldiers coming along, and there are orders and documentary evidence that we seized at all the various headquarters on the eastern border of the Republic, what is now the Republika Srpska. So that documentation, coupled with the scientific evidence, coupled with the eyewitness testimony, then the expert evidence of each of the experts that come along and give the evidence, that corroborates everybody, and I liken it to a jigsaw puzzle. That piece goes there, that piece goes there, that piece goes there, and at the end of the trial, hopefully there are no pieces missing, and the whole picture is there for the trial chamber to be able to make their determination as to the guilt or otherwise of the accused. This afternoon, it was just mentioned earlier, there's going to be a visit. So I'm touching very briefly on most of the subjects here now. But this afternoon we'll have a lot more time, and one of my colleagues, Erin Gallagher, who is one of our senior investigators, her and I are going to sit down in one of our offices, and we're going to go through methodically a lot of the material that I've just discussed, the mass graves in Srebrenica, the types of forensic work that's been done, and she's got a lot of slides that she'll be able to show everybody. So we'll go into a lot more detail this afternoon. As I said, forensics has played a huge role in the investigative and prosecutorial process of the conflict in the former Yugoslavia. The focus or the role of the forensics in the investigative process and how the results pan out is something that has evolved over the period of time that we've got, that we've had our tribunal. But it's not that different to what you'd have in a national jurisdiction. For example, if you get called, or as a police officer back in Sydney, I would get called to a murder scene. You would then immediately, you would call in all your forensic work. Your pathologist would come in, the government medical officer would come in, pronounce life extinct, an exhumation, not in those days. Post-mortem would take place, and the pathologist would give his expert findings as to the cause of death of the person. Scenes of crime officers would come in and they would photograph the scene. It's very, very similar to what occurs in the international environment and the national environment, except we have the management of the forensic examination is a lot more complicated in the international environment. We have to bring together many, many forensic disciplines. We have to bring together the archaeologists, the anthropologists, the pathologists, the scenes of crime officers, the video technicians, etc., etc. And we have to get them into the one location. So, for example, when we were doing the exhumations in Srebrenica or when we were doing the exhumations in Kosovo, we were calling upon expertise from the United States, from France, from Denmark, from Germany, from the United Kingdom, from South America, from Malaysia a team came. So we were bringing all the experts in. And it's imperative that when you bring all those people in to work as one team, that you have a number of things in place to be able to say to the court, this is exactly what we did. These are the protocols that were put in place, and everybody worked according to those protocols. So at any crime scene, it's essential that a number of conditions are met. Firstly, the crime scene should be under the control of properly trained personnel. Secondly, the crime scene should be properly protected. And by that I mean protected at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's what we had in Srebrenica. We had the assistance of the military. They would guard the site overnight for us, and they would also, because we were working in hostile territory at that particular time, they would also carry out the guarding of the forensic personnel and ICTY staff. And lastly, the crime scene must be properly managed. So there must be a manager, a logistics officer, and everybody must play their part. You have your senior archaeologist, your senior pathologist, etc., etc., and everybody must know exactly what everybody else is doing. These conditions relate mainly to exhumations of mass graves. However, they're also important for all scientific examinations, where the credibility of the process could be called into question and could also extend, for example, to the search for documents. Again, you have to have protocols in place if you're going to carry out a search of a police station or a search of a military barracks. Every person that takes part in that, from the person who videos it, to the person who photographs it, to the person who's taking the documents, everybody must know what everybody else is doing. Basically, what I've always said, in the international criminal law setting, as it is in a national setting, as far as the evidence is concerned, we not only have to preserve the crime scene, we have to be able to prove that we did so. And we have to be able to tell a trial chamber or a court of law, this is exactly what we did. These were the protocols that were in place, and this is how we did everything. Crime scene examination relies upon 5 factors. And again, I've touched on many of these already. The first one is communication. Everybody must know what is going on. From the person who's driving the experts to the scene or driving the investigators to the scene, right up to the senior person who is managing the particular crime scene. Everybody must know what's going on, and communication is important. That then moves us on to the knowledge. Everybody, as I said, must have knowledge of what's going on and how everybody fits together. It's no good just one particular forensic discipline working over here, another one working over there, and they too don't know exactly what the main aim of the exhumation is. Preparation is important. A lot of the work that we do at the tribunal is done actually here in The Hague before we actually go out into the field. Going out into the field, everything falls together because of the preparation that we've done. And of course, my big one is teamwork. Everybody must work as a team. Whether you're staying back here in The Hague and you're looking after things here, or whether you're out at the scene or you're interviewing witnesses, everybody is one big team and everybody, again, knows exactly what everybody else is doing. And again, the other important thing is the management and control of the crime scene. The reason... Oh, okay. All, again, as I said earlier, all are interdependent and of equal value to the whole. Everything must be there and they all must work together. It's no good just saying, okay, well, we had communication and teamwork, but we had no preparation and management and control. Everything must be linked together to make it a successful mission, and to be able to say to a court of law, to the trial chamber that we're working with, that this is what we did and this is how we did it, and then the trial chamber can be 100% guaranteed that everything is falling together in the right way. Because bear in mind, we have to prove that the people that we have indicted, we have to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And everything that we do is under scrutiny, and particularly in the trials that we're doing now. The trials of Radovan Karadzic, the trial of Ratko Mladic, they're ongoing, and we are getting now, on those particular two trials, we're getting subjected to a lot of critical assessment as to what we've done. So far, we're staying above it, but they are really, really pushing hard in relation to everything that we've done, whether it be interviewing of witnesses, whether it be crime scenes. But again, we're proving to the court this is what we've done. The court is saying, look, there is no need for the experts to come along. We are more than satisfied that it's been done to a professional standard. The evidence goes in without the expert having to come along and explain in detail what the person's done. Okay, now the reason that all forensic examinations must be controlled is because the parameters are properly defined for all the persons involved in the process. Everything relating to the scene is to be properly recorded, and the crime scene managers understand the forensic recovery plan. Now by that, what I mean there is that everything that we're doing is defined by our statute or by our rules of procedure and evidence. We're working to that. We're working, when we go into a crime scene, we're obtaining evidence. From the minute we walk onto the site, evidence is being obtained, so we're recording. We take video people with us, we take photographers with us, we take exhibit who log everything that's done. From the minute that a mass grave, for example, is opened, everything is logged as to what's done. And the crime scene managers, they must understand what is the reason we're doing this. Are we doing this purely for humanitarian reasons, which is in one respect of what we're doing, but the major reason that we're doing all this is for production in a court of law to prove that somebody is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the major reason why everybody must know what the plan is. The gathering of evidence and its integrity is the responsibility of all the individuals coming into contact with the physical evidence at each stage of the process or of the investigation. So everybody must perform to the highest standard there, whether you're the driver or whether you're the manager of the crime scene. Now again, as I touched on exhibits, there's three main considerations when you're dealing with exhibits, and exhibits can be anything. Exhibits can be rocks, exhibits can be the bodies, exhibits can be documents, and they have to be, these three considerations must be the integrity of the exhibit, the continuity of the exhibit. Now the continuity, by that, what I mean by the continuity is that the minute that you seize the exhibit, whether it be, the best example I think is documentary evidence. The minute that you seize a document, you have to prove from the minute that it came into your custody what's happened with it until it goes in before the trial chamber. So what we do, we log everything in an exhibit log, we bring it back to The Hague, we give it to our evidence unit, it's given an individual number, a Bates number. Every single page of documentation, we have something like 9.3 million pages of documentation in our exhibit vaults or in our evidence vaults, and I think probably 80% of that are documents that we've seized from the former Yugoslavia. So we have to prove the continuity of every single thing that comes back to The Hague. And the packaging and handling, again, is imperative when you're bringing things in from the field. Because we have to drive long distances, we have to come back to Sarajevo, or we have to go to Pristina or to Zagreb. We then have to fly back. We have to ensure that when those exhibits are put onto a plane, for example, that we know exactly where they're going, what they've done. So we actually put them onto the plane, we see them go on, we take them off when we get to Schiphol Airport here in Amsterdam. So I'm going to start to wind up now because I'm about to get the 5-minute... Was it all plain sailing? The way that I've described all this today is, yes, it was, but it wasn't. It was very difficult. In some instances, we weren't making it up as we went along, but we were going with what we put into a national jurisdiction. It's like my jurisdiction in New South Wales. In the early days, we were using some of the things that we did in the New South Wales Police, for example, statements, etc. We did it according to the way that I was taught to do it. After 18 years, we've now developed our own sort of practices and procedures. At our exhumation sites, on many occasions, we're in hostile environments. So not only did we have to protect the crime scene, but we had to be protected ourselves from, I won't say enemy forces, but people who were hostile to the tribunal. And bearing in mind, in 1994, 1995, when we commenced this, the war was still raging in Bosnia. So we were going into a war zone to obtain our evidence. The other area which we'll touch on this afternoon is we found in Srebrenica that we had primary graves and secondary graves. And this was, what happened was that the Serb authorities knew that we knew where the primary graves were. So they then dug the bodies up and they moved them to a secondary grave. So what we had to do then, we had to link the primary grave to the secondary grave and vice versa. And it's fascinating, it really is. I don't have the time to go into it now, but this afternoon we will go into a lot more. One of the senior trial attorneys was at one of the mass graves, at the secondary grave. And the archaeologist said, these people weren't buried here initially. He said, they were buried near a bottling plant. And Peter said, yeah, they're buried here. He said, that's all we need to know. And he said, no. He said, this is a secondary grave. And he was able to prove to the senior trial attorney that because there was glass in the grave with the people, because it was so foreign to that particular area. And then he walked across to another grave, and another expert who was sitting there patting a rock. He said, this is a river rock. And Peter said, it's a rock. He said, no, he said, it's a river rock. He said, these people weren't buried. He said, I don't use star. He said, so you're saying it's a secondary grave as well? And he said, yes. And what happened was that they were initially buried, the victims were initially buried at a place called Kozluk, which was right on the edge of the Drina River, and across the road was the bottling factory, the Kozluk bottling factory, and all the glass went in there as well. And they moved them across to a secondary grave, and they moved all the glass and the rocks with them, and it was miles inland, and that's how the experts were able to determine. But we'll discuss that again this afternoon. And again, this is just another map where in the red we have the primary grave, and the green are the secondary graves where they were found, and that's the first one again in and around Srebrenica. And again, I'll just very quickly conclude now, but again, some of the challenges that we faced in our documentary evidence. We're 20 years on now from the war, 1992. And our documents are starting to fray. For example, some of the documents that we've seized were typed or written on rice paper. We took facsimile messages, etc. So I think probably everybody knows that in February of 2010 we seized what we've called the Mladic notebooks at General Mladic's home when he was still a fugitive. With the assistance of the Serb police, we raided General Mladic's home in Belgrade. And in behind a wall, we found all his war notebooks, all his wartime diaries, which was a treasure trove. And again, we went through all the procedures to protect them. And then when we got them back to The Hague, we found that they were starting to deteriorate by handling. So we rang the Netherlands Forensic Institute again, and Irene and Doris came and helped us, how to store these critical documents that basically explain General Mladic's role during the war. They're written by him in his hand contemporaneously as the war went on. So it's critical evidence, and we're using them in all of the trials now since we seized them. It's been good. And again, with our videos and our audios, they're starting to deteriorate as well. So we undertook a number of years ago a digitisation project to do that. Okay, so I'll stop there now, and I look forward to meeting hopefully most of you this afternoon, where we'll go through in a lot more detail the work that we've done, particularly in and around the mass grave sites at Srebrenica. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.